Hi, welcome to the video Spring Boot REST API Validate Query Parameters with me Nam Hà Minh from Code Java.net. In this video, I'd love to share with you how to validate query parameters or request parameters of REST API request with Spring Boot Starter Validation. And you will also learn how to customize error response with a global exception handler. Query parameters are in the form of name equal value pairs in the URL with HTTP GET method or in the request body with HTTP POST method. Let's see an example. This API request has the method is GET and the request URI like this. And you see there are two query parameters in this request. The first one has the name page size with the value 10, and the second query parameter has the name page num with the value is 2. And we want to apply the validation constraints such as the value of page size must be between 5 and 10, and the value of page num must be a positive number. So in this video, in the next few minutes, I'll show you how to write code to validate the values of query parameters. Let me show you an existing Java Spring Boot project that implements the student APIs, and you can see this is a REST controller class, and it declares the base URI is /API/v1/students, and the handler method list for the list students API. You see, it returns a list of students based on the query parameters page size and page num. Okay, let me start this application to test the list student APIs. In this project, I used H2 in-memory database, and I have some dummy student information here. There are 7 students. You can see. All right, now I test the API using Postman. List all students, and the HTTP method is get the URI of the request is like this, and I don't specify any query parameters in the request URL. Click send. So I got internal server error with the error message here. You see. So you can see it's because no validation constraints applied for the query parameters page size and page num. Now let me test a positive case. I specify query parameters here. The first one is page size equal 5, and the second one page num equal 1. Meaning that I want to get the first page of the list students with 5 students per page. Okay, so this is the query, and you can see the query params here: page size value 5 and page num value 1, and click send. Okay, now I got a successful response. You see status 2 hour okay, and in the body of the response is a JSON document. You can see this is the first page, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 students, because I specify in the query that there are 5 students per page in the page size parameter. In the console view, you can see it prints values of page size and page num. Okay, and I can see the second page by changing the value of the page num query parameter here. Click send, and you see on the second page there are two students, ID 6 and ID 7 here. If I enter the page num is 3, then no students. It is an empty array. Okay. So now we need to update the code to validate the values of these query parameters, page size and page num, to ensure that they have valid values to avoid seeing the internet server error. Okay, so to apply validation for query parameters or request parameters, firstly you need to have the dependency Spring Boot starter validation for the project. As you can see here, I used Spring Boot starter validation dependency for the project. It will use the APIs from Jakarta Bean Validation APIs. Okay, and to validate the values of the query parameters, you can see in Spring MVC the parameters in the handler method, page size and page num are bound directly to the request parameters in the URL. So very simple. You just declare the parameters of the method, and Spring MVC will buy the values of the query parameters in the request with the values of the parameters in the handler method. Now to validate these two query parameters, you need to use the validated annotation for the REST controller class here. Validated annotation from this package Spring Framework validation annotation. And then we use some constraint annotations provided by Jakarta Bean Validation APIs. For example, for the parameter page size, I can use the min annotation. You see, it imports the min annotation from Jakarta.validation.constraints package and specifies the minimum value required for the parameter page size is 5. And also use the max annotation to specify the maximum value of the parameter page size is 10. Okay, and to validate the values of the page num query parameter, we can use the positive annotation like this to require that the value of page num must be greater than 0. Okay, now let's test again. Of course, this is a positive case, and now I want to test a negative case. I specify invalid values for the query parameters page size and page num. Page size equal 3 and page num equal 0. Click send, and I got a 500 internet server error. And you can see the exception thrown is constraint violation exception. With the error message is like this: list is a handler method name, page num is a query parameter, must be greater than 0, correct, and list dot page size must be greater than or equal to 5. But we want to have more have better error response like this. The request is like this. You see, get slash API slash v1 students and two query parameters, page size equal 3, page num equal 0. So we expect that the error response is like this. You see, HTTP status code 400 BAT request instead of 500 internal server error, and the response body is the JSON document that represents the error details with the fields timestamp, status, error, and path. And you can see the error message indicate the details here. Page num must be greater than 0. Page size must be greater than or equal to 10 or 5. Okay. So to customize the error response here, we need to use the global exception handler. In this project, I already have a custom exception handler, which is a global exception handler class. And now we need to write a new handler method to catch the constraint violation exception here. Okay, so the method should be handle constraint. Sorry, handle request validation exception. And we specify the parameters, the exception, and the HTTP servlet request. And we need to specify the exception handler annotation and specify the type of exception we want to handle, which is constraint violation exception. Constraint violation exception dot class, and we want that the return object in this handler method will be bound to the web request web response directory. So we use the response body annotation. And for the status code, we use a response status. Specify the HTTP status code is about request. The code is 400, indicating that the request is invalid, meaning that the request has some invalid values in the query parameters. Okay, and let me copy this code to construct a response body. Return response body. We set timestamp status HTTP status but request not value, and we set the error message. Error is the message of the exception get message. Okay, and the path of the request response body, put path, which is request get servlet path. Okay, so this is the error details we want to send to the response body. Okay, and let's test again. Just click send here, and now we got a more succinct error response here. You see, with the status code is 400 BAT request, and the response body here you see timestamp status error. Page num must be greater than 0. Page size must be greater than or equal to 5, and the path of the request. Now let me test a positive case again. I specify the page size is 6 and page num is 1. Alright, the values of the query parameters are valid, so I got the successful response here. This is the first page of the students you see 6 students, and in the second page I should see only one student because there are total 7 students, you see. And what if we don't want to specify the values of query parameters explicitly? We want to use the default value if the query parameters are missing. For example, I don't specify any query parameters here. So we also need to handle this exception. Instead of seeing internal server error, we should use the default values. So you can update the handler method, use the request param annotation for the parameter. Yeah, request param and specify the default value and the require attribute require false with the default value is 5. And similarly, use this param annotation for the second parameter page num. And we specify the default value of the page num query parameter is the first page, so the value 1 here. Okay, let's test again. Now I click send button here and it should return a successful response. Here you see true or okay, and by default the default values of page size is 5 and page num is 1. So we see the first page of the student list here. And you can also specify custom message for the validation constraint. For example, I want to specify custom validation error message for the mean annotation here. So specify the message attribute here like this. Page size must greater than 4, and the custom message for the max annotation is page size must be less than 11. Okay, and I specify custom validation error message for the positive annotation here. Page number must be greater than 0. Okay, and let's test the negative case with invalid values for the query parameter. Page size equal 1 and page num equal -1. Click send. Alright, now you see status code for a bad request, and you can see the custom error message here. Page size must be greater than 4. Page number must be greater than 0. Alright, so that you have learned how to validate query parameters of a REST API request with Spring Boot starter validation. Let me sum up the key points. We can use the validation constraint annotations for method parameters that bind to the query parameters in handler methods of REST controller class, and use the validated annotation for the REST controller, and handle the constraint violation exception in global exception handler class in order to customize the error response. and use the request program annotation to specify different name, default value, and mandatory option of a parameter. And for the reference, this is a list of Jakarta Bean validation constraints which you can use to validate query parameters of the REST APIs. And this is a list of hybrid validator constraints. I hope you found this video helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, like, comment, and share this video. Thanks for watching.